So officially welcome. My name is Chris Ajemian. I'm the CEO and founder of Kate's Tutoring and Educational Services. And as always, one of your co-hosts for today. Hope you're all doing well. Once again, joined by my dear friend and mentor, Michael Muska, who's worked in admissions offices at Brown, Cornell, Oberlin, and many, many, many others, and now runs Relativity College Counseling. And he's already told me, but Michael, you want to sort of share with the viewing audience how you doing today? Good?
All good. Everything's good here. Little rain down in the Jersey Shore, but other than that, we're good.
Perfect. Love it. So again, housekeeping, I'll facilitate the conversation as usual. If you have any questions at any point in time, please put them in the Q&A panel, not the chat thread, the Q&A panel, please, which you can access by scrolling over the bottom of your screen. Additionally, for the best experience, we recommend setting your screen to gallery view, which you can do by scrolling over the right top corner of your browser and selecting gallery instead of, say, speaker mode. And you also may want to click view options at the top of your window and select side-by-side mode. So Michael and I appear side-by-side and next to the slides in the same window. So our agenda for today is supplemental essays for different colleges in certain categories. And we're going to first talk about what is a supplemental essay? How is it different from the Common App essays? We'll talk about what we call personal plus essays. Then the why the school / academic essays, additive character essays. Again, that's our term for these types of essays, short prompts, as well as other prompts. And again, we'll also do a Q&A afterwards. And, again, if you have questions during the segments, just please put them in the Q&A panel. If there is a question that you have that you feel may be better asked offline, you're always welcome to give us a call or email us. Here's our respective contact information. And we'll be very happy to answer a question that we may have maybe glossed over or didn't quite answer. Over email. So certainly happy to do that. So as always, Michael, shall we do our quick update? What is happening in college admissions from what you're hearing, sir?
Well, I think the biggest thing really isn't just necessarily college admissions. It's what's going on campuses right now. I mean, UNC had their entire freshman class come into campus, and a week later, they're sending them home.
Crazy.
I think that some schools were a little over anxious and eager to get going and get back to normal when we just weren't ready for that yet. And I think a lot of high schools are wrestling with the same thing right now in terms of how they're going to teach this fall. And I think colleges from an admissions point of view are going to have to see what schools are doing and understanding how schools will be teaching, will be grading. The whole concept of college admission officers visiting high schools is just not going to happen. I mean, I think that, it's a whole different world out there in terms of what we're seeing. But I think, like I say, a few colleges were just a little too quick to move forward on terms of what they thought they could do.
Hey, Michael, because you just raised it, I have a question, which is, in our previous webinars, we talked about how college admissions officers may be sort of, looking at spring 2020 from a much more kind of like loose sort of liberal perspective. Therefore, your grades first semester senior year were going to probably matter, even more. They always matter. But, in light of what we're seeing now, as you kind of get closer to school opening, what's your perspective on how schools might look at fall grades if they do in fact sort of stay virtual? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, two parts. It's something we said in previous seminars. Make sure as you're picking your teachers for your teacher recommendations from last year, you're picking someone who's going to talk about how you functioned during the COVID situation, because I think that's what colleges are going to want to hear and see, because they may only be looking at a pass-fail grade. That being said, you're absolutely right. In terms of what happens this fall, I think we mentioned this in a previous episode, but Princeton has announced they're not having early action this year, primarily because they want to see a full semester worth of grades from the fall before they start to evaluate applications. I haven't heard other schools following suit yet, but I think there's a reality of, as you just said, fall grades will be fairly significant. It'll be interesting to see how colleges decide how to deal with early decision and early action in light of no spring grades, and really not having many grades from the fall this year already. So, it's going to be, I think we're going to see a lot of changes still coming up in the next month or so. So, yeah.
Right. And just to sort of add to that, as far as admissions updates go, if you haven't been on one of our previous webinars or haven't been reading the news, 20 to 25% of Harvard's incoming freshman class has deferred to next year. That means that there's 20 to 25 fewer spots available to the students who are high school seniors now or are going to be in a few weeks who are applying for the class in 2025. In addition to that, I had mentioned, a few weeks ago that, I didn't have data on other schools and what their sort of deferral percentages look like, but I know from a contact that Duke University is looking at about 10 to 15% have deferred. So, there's obviously going to be a lot of competition in the college admissions process. There always is, but now things are getting, even more tight. So, and then on testing update, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that too. It's not necessarily going to be deferrals. It's also going to be no shows. There are probably going to be a significant number of kids that get to the end of August and are ready to go to school, and they finally decide, I'm just going to wait, and as we talked about this in a previous seminar, those kids can still apply somewhere else for the following year. There's no reason that they can at the last minute decide, I just don't think it's the right time for me to go to college.
It's funny about that, Michael. Earlier today, I was talking to a family, and they told me a story about one of their family friends. The daughter started at UNC. UNC literally just closed up, and now she's taking a gap year. So kind of like to your point of no-shows, there are some students who are even starting school and then deciding to kind of pull back into the gap year. So we may not really know what this looks like until October.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yep.
Cool. And then finally, as far as updates go, as far as standardized testing is concerned, really all schools are test optional. In fact, I had a student who was doing some visits this past week, and I was meeting with admissions officials at some fantastic universities, and they said to the family, we honestly don't care if you send in the tests. If you have the tests, great. If you don't have the tests, great. And that's like coming from the mouths of directors of admissions at schools that people want to go to. So,
and worse than that, Chris, this morning the SAT announced that at least 1/3 of the scheduled registrants for the August test will not have seats.
Incredible. So I didn't see that. Thanks for pointing that out. I'll have to check my College Board feed. But all right, well, Michael, enough of the updates. Let's get on to the fun stuff. All right, cool. So what is a supplemental essay? We have to first sort of like discuss this. We have to first discuss what this thing actually is. And so we're going to kind of get through this as quickly as possible. But as well as your main essays in the common application, many colleges ask you to submit supplemental essays. And these essays help colleges get a fuller picture of who you are. They gauge your demonstrated interest in the school. And you'll usually find them under on the My Colleges tab. Most schools will have supplemental essays under an item called questions or in a writing supplement section. We're actually going to take a look at these. Some of the schools, like Stanford, for example, don't actually segment the application, the questions, and make it all one particular sort of drop down. And I'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. But some schools have their own system for supplements rather than the common application. Like, for example, Hamilton is an example of this. You have to first apply to Hamilton, and then once you're inside their portal after you've actually applied, that's where there might be some supplemental essay questions to submit. But although most schools require a supplement in some form, others make it optional, and others also make it they don't have a supplement. There's no supplement. We're going to talk about what that means and how to handle that. So the essays, supplemental essays, they can take on a variety of different formats. They can be centered around a number of topics. In today's webinar, Michael and I are going to sort of dig deeply as we outline the main categories of the essays and give you some top tips for how to navigate it. So we'll get started. All right, cool. So the first category is what I call personal plus essays. And so personal plus essays, what are these? I got some 3 points here for you to sort of chew on, but effectively what I'm calling a personal plus essay is simply like another personal essay, much like the one that you wrote for the Common App. And it's usually requiring about 500 to even 650 words, which is the word limit for the Common App personal essay. And so it's a similar length. And it's, it requires a similar style, a similar approach. And because of this, a lot of the strategies that we discussed a few weeks ago in our August 5th webinar on how to approach the Common App, some of those things we talked about in August 5th will apply to the Personal Plus essays here. As far as structure, style, all that jazz. So we recommend checking out the August 5th webinar on the Kate's website. So for now, I'll simply say that the Personal Plus essay is similar to the Common App essay, but you should not write about the same things. I mean, on the contrary, you're probably looking more of like points of contrast, things about you that can't be revealed in any other part of your application, whether it's your transcript, your test scores, your activities. Sometimes it's an interesting or unusual aspect of yourself that you want to like highlight to kind of catch admissions. And so some schools that have really good examples of Personal Plus essays are schools like University of Chicago, which we're going to talk about, as well as Harvard. So I'm going to bounce this over now to the Common App. As you probably know from previous webinars, I have our Kate's Zoom Common App profile. We're going to go over here first, University of Chicago. And again, we're going to be going down to here's application and then writing supplement, and we'll go over here to the questions. And Michael, Chicago's got this big Personal Plus here. They call it an extended essay, and they have a couple of different options. So, I sort of touched upon some like high level ideas of what schools might be looking for. But, when you're advising your students, what's the best way to approach these essays? What do we need to know about this? What's like your take on these like extra personal essays?
I think what's really interesting is something you just kind of said a minute ago, Chris. Here's an opportunity to show another dimension of who you are. You've written your Common App essay. There's a story in terms of what that's all about. And certain schools will give you kind of a direction to go. Certainly Chicago, we'll talk about it in a second, does that. Other schools are going to be a little more open-ended in terms of what you can do. So I think it's really interesting to me in terms of, how can you tell a little bit more about who you are? I'm working with a student right now who is a dedicated scuba person. Cool. And his interest in scuba has started to get him to be interested in coral reefs and environmental science, okay? And so all of a sudden there's a whole different, and that's not the topic of his Common App essay. So there's an opportunity for him to share having had this experience and how it's expanded into an educational kind of thing. But to get back to Chicago in particular, I love Chicago. I mean, I think Chicago is so quirky. You used the expression earlier today, Chris, it's a little bit nerdy, but it's a place where a student can kind of be that and be the academic that they are. And what's interesting about the Chicago questions, and they've always been known over, for decades in terms of having really cool supplemental essays, that if you look at it, they're created by their students and their alumni. Yeah. In other words, people who have had the Chicago experience have created these questions as options for students to follow. And it gives you, something we talked about, and Chris, you said this a little bit earlier today. Maybe you're not able to visit a school right now, but you can get a sense of the school from perhaps the questions they ask you and how Absolutely. They want to get to see you. And I think the Chicago questions are perfect examples of the kind of place Chicago is. And if a kid reads these questions and says, oh, these are all weird, then Chicago may not be a good place for you. But if another kid reads these questions and said, oh my God, these questions are so cool, then you might be a Chicago kind of guy.
Yeah, that really resonates. Well, first of all, by the way, if your student is interested, my brother is actually someone he has his own lab at Florida Atlantic University. He actually studies coral reefs. So if your student wants an internship or whatnot, please let me know. I have some introductions for him. But it's a fascinating field, truly. But as far as the Chicago essays go, talk about a school that really gives their students voice, right? I mean, just looking at some of these prompts here, like, man, this is like just like so cool. Like, what can actually be divided by 0? I mean, what a fascinating kind of question. Usually if it's divided by zero, it means it's undefined in math and it doesn't actually exist. But like, what a kind of a cool like jumping off point. And so, you're right. Like Chicago does it really, really well. And this is probably, I think, one of the reasons why we chose Chicago is that this is probably as extreme as it gets. We're talking about like the personal plus essays. I mean, you have like complete freedom, and you should use that freedom. I know one of the students that I had worked with a couple of years ago, who recently actually graduated from University of Chicago, what she did was Chicago always has this last prompt, right, Michael?
Yep.
Basically write your own question.
Just like the Common App. Yes. Yep.
Right. Basically, like, write your own question. And what she did was she said, if you were a chemical compound, what would you be? And for her approach was she wrote about sodium amide. And she did a real kind of like cool like twist on it where she called it sodium ami. And she used the chemical compound as a metaphor for all the different kind of like parts of her. It was incredibly cool, incredibly deep. Like, it was about performance. It was about science. It was about organic chemistry. It was about her relationships. It was like so awesome. So yeah. So if you're looking at Chicago and you're looking at some of these like prompts and you're like, I'm not feeling these, but I like the idea, there's always this opportunity to sort of write your own.
And notice
anything more to say about Chicago?
But notice how they end the seventh prompt. Take a little risk and have fun. I mean, that's a great way to kind of illustrate a little bit of the philosophy of Chicago as they approach this admissions process.
Right. So with that idea of sort of taking a risk and having fun, let's go over to Harvard. And let's take a look at Harvard's supplement. Here's the questions. So Michael, this is another example of like what we call like a personal plus essay. You've got up to 650 words, but what do you make of these types of prompts from a school like Harvard?
Well, what's obviously evident is how different it is from Chicago. It's much more serious. What would you tell your roommate about you? Talk about your travel experiences. How do you hope to use your college education? It's different things in terms of, being a model citizen in the Harvard College Honor Code. How different from the questions you just saw at Chicago. So in other words, it's kind of, again, do the questions the college ask reflect the kind of school that they are? And that's not to say that Chicago isn't serious, but it's Chicago showing we're going to give you a little levity in terms of what you can write about. Harvard, on the other hand, is much more traditional, much more set in terms of the kinds of questions they ask, which probably says a little bit about what Harvard is, And again, read through these things and you'll see that these are the kinds of questions that you probably almost would expect from a Harvard.
So it's funny, a couple of weeks ago in one of our previous webinars, we were talking about this idea of like the right fit. Right. And it's funny how looking at sort of juxtaposing the University of Chicago personal plus essay and, the Harvard University or Harvard College personal plus sort of essays, it draws a pretty stark contrast between the two schools and who might be like the right fit for it. And so it's just a really good example where, even though these two schools were really in the top tier of all educational experiences in the US, they are like distinctively different. And I think it's really kind of cool to see that playing out in the essays. Michael, anything more to say about the Harvard Personal Plus essays? Or
I would think the other thing to say is, and we've said this earlier in other webinars, what you write in both your Common App essay and now what you write in your supplemental essays are going to be so much more important this year than previous years because of the lack of test scores and the lack of spring grades. So again, doing a good job on this, really paying attention to it. No, I think it's become far more important this year than it has in previous years.
So it's funny, that your comment actually sprung another sort of anecdote, which is I have a student who's she's at Harvard now, and she wrote this essay. This idea of like kind of like taking like the Chicago, take a risk and bring it over to Harvard, where Harvard seems like it's a bit more standard. She took a pretty interesting risk, and she actually talked about the admissions lawsuit, which I thought was really, really interesting. And she tied it to an essay on sort of Greek and Latin heroes, because she was big into classics. And it was a really nice example of sort of taking a risk within a a suite of options, if you will, that might be a little bit more traditional. So
And again, remember, as it says here in the prompts, right at the start, you may write on a topic of your choice or follow the prompts they suggest. The only thing that I would say is the prompts that they have here show you a little bit of the kind of essay that they're looking for.
Totally. All right. So those are the personal plus essays. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to sort of move around to the next category, and we're going to be doing the why this school or / the academics essay. This is sort of the next sort of like big kind of like subgroup of supplements. And again, we've got our 3 points here on these on these types of essays, and in effect, it's kind of giving the skinny on it. So these are going to be a little bit shorter. Okay, these are going to be kind of coming in around 200 to 500 words, but there's a good deal of variation out there. And one thing I didn't sort of actually show you is that Chicago also has this kind of essay. So it's not like, schools only have like one supplement. Some schools have none, some have one, some have two. And some of the things that we'll be talking about today, you'll actually see them, sort of in a mix in individual schools potentially. But, you might be wondering why we grouped the why the school and the academic questions. And the answer is that honestly, in most cases, there's a lot of overlap between these two types of essays. So with the why the school, you're probably going to be talking specifically about the academic school or program that you're applying to in some way, shape, or form. The majors, the classes you want to be taking, opportunities of research, and other ways to engage academically or in a learning capacity outside of class. And so, that's consistent between the two. But with the why the school, and Michael's going to give us some really interesting kind of insights on this in a minute. But with the why the school, there's always like these non-academic factors, extracurriculars, athletics, campus culture, community careers, et cetera. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you how these guys play out, looking at both Penn, and then we're going to take a look at Duke. So, Michael, I'm going to swing back over to the Common App here and bring us over to Penn, which we've been on this application a few times in our last few sessions. So I always love what you have to say about essays of this ilk. And the way this one's phrased, it says, how did you discover the intellectual and academic interests, and how will you explore them at University of Pennsylvania? Please respond considering the specific undergraduate school you have selected. 3 to 450, and then there's also a community essay over here for Penn, but let's just focus on this guy right now. Michael, what's sort of like the best practices? How do you advise people on how to approach these?
First of all, the slide that you showed a little while ago, here's a perfect example of how you need to think through how you would use that. Here's an example where one school may say, why our school? And it's the only question. And so in that question, you would talk about some of the other parts of what the school is about and why it would be of interest to you.
Right.
Penn is much more explicit in terms of what they're doing here. Question number 1 is academic. So you want to talk about what program, what has brought you to the interest in that program. Perhaps, is there a professor at Penn who you've read about and who inspires you? But to be able to put a totally academic spin on the first part of this question that is Penn specific. The second part of the question is, what will you bring to the community? What will you share? What kinds of things will you be involved in? So it clearly is, there's a separation in the Penn situation, which is different than a lot of schools that just give you the 650 words to write about everything. The one caution I would give, and not necessarily for Penn, because Penn is much clearer, is that when you write your essay about why that school, go back and reread it and make sure that it's not interchangeable with another school, okay? We talked many times about how you can take things from one essay and move it into another. I had a great episode years ago with the George Washington admissions person. And he basically said that if he could read the essay of why a student wanted to go to George Washington, and it was applicable to both Georgetown and American, then they knew the student hadn't taken the time to really look at why the student wanted to go to George Washington, okay? So keep that in mind in terms of just the why a particular school. Again, Penn does a great job because they actually separate it, okay? You know, in the DC app, you know, you talk about why I love DC, et cetera, et cetera. This doesn't allow you to do this. This is school specific in part one, and then community and activity specific in part two.
You know, what's interesting, Michael, is that as you know, with the remarks that you're making, I was looking at as I normally do, all the questions that were submitted in the registration before, you know, we sort of got on today. And to be honest, like I'd say like 85% of the questions that were submitted were asked about how do you make your why this school application stand out? Would love to kind of hear your thoughts on that, but I'm thinking that a lot of it comes back to exactly what you're saying. You've really dug deeply into the academic offerings and others, but specifically academic offerings at these schools. And it's extremely clear that you really understand what's being offered, why it's different, and why these particular professors, classes, programs, et cetera, work for your sort of like, you know, future self. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, in the old days, I hate to use that last year, when students were able to go and visit campuses, they would sit in on classes. They might interact with a professor. They might get a real feel for what the school is like, which they're not able to do right now. I guess what I would encourage students to do is do a little research, perhaps in terms of the professors that teach there. What have they published? What are their specialties? Is it something that really resonates with you? You know, you used the example before of the student, of someone who wants to go into environmental studies and be involved in marine biology. Well, there's some great stuff out there. And you may find out, for example, if you apply to the University of Miami with this phenomenal marine biology program,
Amazing. Yeah.
that there's these guys that have just done this cool stuff that you can really relate to. And then you mentioned that. It's like, oh my God, I would love to study with Professor so-and-so. He's done such cool work. If I'm an admissions person, I say that kid's done their homework. So to take the time to do that and be school specific is absolutely critical in terms of that piece.
You know, it's interesting too, Michael. I was talking to a student earlier today who, you know, ironically is actually applying to Penn, and we're talking about what you're, sort of commenting on, this idea of engaging professors. To be honest, it might be easier than ever to sit in on classes because they're on Zoom. You know, so for everyone out there who's asking the questions, you know, hopefully you're taking this guidance to heart. You know, there are ways of not just researching, there's also ways of demonstrating your interest and maybe even getting inside some of these classrooms to really understand these schools from the inside. And that may inform or should inform the way you approach these essays. So Michael, Penn gives us 450 words to talk about like why Penn/academics. They give us, you know, another 200 words or so for the community. But if you go over to Duke University, they're giving us similar questions, but they're doing it in, they want it in like 200 words. So Michael, how do you advise people, you know, when they're looking to try to communicate the same idea, how do you do it in like 450 words versus 200 words? Like what's similar, what's different? What do you focus on?
I guess I would use the example of the student who writes their Common App essay draft and gives me 1,000 words, and we have to get it down to 650, okay? So I would take the same approach here in terms of the Duke offering, is that you're going for quality, not quantity. And I think if you read the question in particular, it says, is there something in particular? Okay,
Right.
Read the wording of the question, okay? So you're not gonna go into a generality that you might do at a school that lets you have 600 words. You're gonna be much more specific in terms of what is there in particular that attracts you to that particular school for that reason, yeah.
Cool. Now, Michael, moving down over here, we have it's not off topic, it's related, but you have some pretty interesting perspective on these questions from Duke about diversity. And, just to give everyone in the viewing audience some context, for the last couple of years, Duke has effectively had a Why Duke, as well as what we'll call like the diversity essay. But now they have, the diversity essay a bit more broadly, and now they have one over here, diversity and inclusion, specifically related to sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. Michael, what are we looking at? Why has it been segmented? And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll give you some real insight. Christoph Gutentag, the Dean of Admissions, actually chatted with me when we included this last question. And I think part of it was a concern in terms of a perception of Duke as a Southern university not being welcoming of students that perhaps, you know, did want to talk about their sexual orientation or their gender identity. It's also an opportunity for a student, and as he and I agreed on this, the parent doesn't necessarily have to ever see the answer to this question. So for a student who's still perhaps closeted, but is thinking that when they get to Duke, they want to be able to have a little bit more comfort in who they are, including this in their essay is a perfect opportunity. The example I used before to you in terms of the first essay is much more community-based, the second essay is much more personally based. Example that I would use is you might talk about Black Lives Matter in the first essay, but then the second essay, you might talk about something much more specific to yourself.
Right. We're still in the why this school and the academics sort of bucket or section of our talk here, but we wanted to touch upon these Duke essays because opportunity, and obviously Michael was literally involved in the drafting of this question. So it's just always great to kind of get his perspective on anything. So Michael, thank you. So we're going to head back over to the slides. And we're going to start talking more now about, additive character essay, which really kind of builds off of the diversity piece that we're just looking at. And with additive character essays, again, we've got 3 points here for you to sort of chew on as we sort of talk about some of the details. And this is a broad category. But you'll see them pop up in supplements of many colleges. And in essence, they're sort of like, they're shorter pieces, so like 100 to 400 words that are looking to illuminate different facets of your personality, your passions, your plans for the future. They're shorter, than your Common App and your Personal Plus and maybe your Why the School essay. And they require a different strategy than we're going to see when we get to kind of like the short takes associated with schools like Stanford and Yale. But you'll see a wide range of topics in this category, and we're going to take a look at some of them now. And we're going to be looking at 2 schools. We're looking at Dartmouth College, and then we're going to look at Boston College. And head back over now to our good old Common App, Kate Zoom. And we'll start with Dartmouth first. So Dartmouth in their questions section, they have a why Dartmouth. It's 100 words actually. So we're seeing yet again, right, that question being asked differently with a shorter word count. And then over here, this is what I call like the additive character essays. They give us a whole sort of selection. And Michael, these look a little bit more like Chicago essays insofar they're kind of cool and fun. Thoughts?
Yep. Exactly what we were talking about earlier in terms of if you looked at this and you looked at the Chicago questions, you could get the same reaction in terms of it. And again, what I like about it, it's a reflection of, I think, what Dartmouth wants to learn about you. Right. They want to see how you think. They want to see how you can go off a little bit off the norm in terms of that. It's so different from Harvard. Okay. So back to thinking about, we were talking about perhaps on the continuum, you've got Chicago at one end, Harvard at the other end, and maybe Dartmouth falls somewhere in the middle in terms of how they're looking at you, in terms of trying to get that picture of who you are in the big picture.
It's interesting now that we're looking at it and sort of reflecting and, looking at the connections. Dartmouth is it's so about community, right? I mean, all the schools are, but particularly Dartmouth, right? Because you're living in Hanover, New Hampshire. I mean, you're secluded. And so I think this is a really good example of how schools are very, very thoughtful and careful in how they build this class, how they build this campus community. And you're seeing that reflected through the essays. Now we'll jump over now, Michael, to Boston College to kind of juxtapose again. But here, BC, they give us 4 options for their what we'll call additive character essay. It's 400 words. They're talking about a great art evokes a sense of wonder. They're talking about community, your background. They're talking about your undergraduate learning experience in the liberal arts. And then they're talking about, of course, the Jesuit education. How do these additive character essays, how do they sort of stack up or relate to the ones we saw at, let's say, Dartmouth?
I think when again, you and I talked about this earlier, I think this really reflects what BC is all about. You look at question number 4, for example, that,
Sure.
what is a Jesuit education is all about and what are the values that you're going to learn from that? But the other questions tie into that as well, too. You can get a theme of what Boston College is all about and what Boston College cares about by the questions that they ask, and then how they're going to read your answers to those questions as to whether they see you as, and you used the word before, a good fit for that university. So it's not just the university being a fit for you, it's you being a fit for them. And these questions are a real opportunity for you to be able to demonstrate that.
So, Michael, here's a question. It just sort of occurred to me as we're looking at these sort of, again, additive character essays, whereas with Dartmouth, they gave us like 100 words for why Dartmouth. BC doesn't really kind of do that. They're not explicit in the why BC. So to what extent or not, when you're advising your students who are writing this kind of essay, to what extent should they be talking about like the why BC within the context of these essays? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it goes back to what we try to say. Read the question and answer the question, okay? In other words, if you look at some of these questions here in particular, the first one, I mean, I love it. Great art evokes a sense of wonder. And it talks about a song, a poem, a speech, a novel. You're not talking about why you want to go to BC. You're talking about why you're inspired by something, okay? The third and fourth questions are much more in the concept of more related to the concept of liberal arts, the Jesuit education, the values of those educations. So any of these things, any of these 4 questions will give BC a sense of who you are. But I always say that, if you were answering number 1 and you started talking about why BC fit for you, that's not the question, okay? So again, respond to the question and make sure that that's what you're trying to say.
Whereas with questions 2, 3, and 4, they're talking about Boston College's community, number 2. They're talking about Boston College strives, number 3, and they're talking about Boston College and Jesuit education in 4. So that's really, I really love that. So you're saying that, there's more opportunity within the truth of the question to kind of sort of slip in a little like why BC for 2, 3, and 4, whereas in number 1 it might be.
I probably wouldn't do it in 1. Yeah,
exactly. That's great. That's great. That's great. Cool. All right. So we're going to kick back over to our slides. We're just moving right along today. It's great. So, all right. So now we're going to be talking about short prompt essays. And again, we've got a couple bullets here for you to sort of chew on. But effectively, the short prompts, these are like 100 words or less. And, they're sort of like quick fire questions. And, the subject matter can vary pretty widely. And you may find some that are sort of interesting or sort of unusual, which is kind of cool. But as you answer them, I always say to people, you want to kind of show off yourself and have some fun. Really, it's an opportunity to be unique, and don't be fooled by the word count, even though it's 100 words. Honestly, it's harder to write a 100-word essay, I think, than a 500-word essay. They still require a lot of thought, a lot of planning, just like the longer pieces. And we're gonna walk you through now through Yale and Stanford, as we had sort of promised sort of earlier. So let me kick back over to the Common App, Michael, and we'll take a look at these prompts. So here's Yale. Now, one thing to sort of show you here with Yale is that, look, they got the application and they have their questions embedded into that, unlike a school like Penn, right? Just to kind of show you its application and then writing supplement. The way that Yale's organized in the Common App, it's different, okay? So if we go to Yale, we go to the questions, they got general questions. This is just like start, term, etc. Then they have academics, contacts, additional questions, and then like their Yale NUS program in Asia. But what I'm trying to show you is that there's actually essays in 2 places here. Okay, you'll find essays in the academics, right, where you choose academics, and you have basically they're asking you, why do these areas appeal to you in 125 words. And then in addition to that, they have the additional questions where a lot of these short takes are. And so Michael, would love to kind of hear, how do you advise people on these sort of like shorter prompts? What are some of the do's? What are some of the don'ts? And just love to kind of hear your insight.
I think number one, what I would say is don't overthink these. I think many times students try to say, what does Yale want me to say, rather than being themselves and answering the question as it applies to them. And I think there are too many students that make a mistake. And then these are supposed to be spontaneous, quick questions. And for them to then turn around and have 4 other people look at those answers and change your answer, I find ludicrous, okay? This is a situation where don't overthink them, make them your response, and answer it the way you want to answer it, okay? But as you said, it's really interesting. One of the things we talked about in a previous webinar was how the application gives a theme of who you are and how it tells the whole story. What's interesting to me is you could think about how you can take some of these questions and some of these shorter essays and how that really ties into the theme that you're trying to present in your application.
Yeah, and just to sort of illustrate that, here's the opportunities that you have. We've already seen the academic interest part, but over here they're doing why Yale, right? In 125 words. And in the short takes, they have what inspires you, 200 characters. Then they talk about the Yale residential college sort of system. If you were invited to speak, if you were to invite someone to speak at the colleges, what question would you ask? They're asking about them, what kind of course would you teach? Then they're asking about you and your suite mates. What are you going to do with them? And then they have some more essays, actually, 250 words, where they're asking about, it's what it says over here, Yale's extensive course offerings and vibrant conversations beyond the classroom encourage students to follow their developing intellectual interests wherever they lead. Tell us about your engagement with a topic or idea that excites you. Why are you drawn to it? That's a really interesting question, right, to answer in light of, or in juxtaposition to, what areas of study do you want to pursue at Yale? Because you'd think that there's actually some connections there. How do you make them distinctly different and interesting? And then over here in question 2, they actually give you three options, again, community membership, or talking about engaging with local issues, or talking about like a role model, or someone who's influenced you. So there's to Michael's point, there's so many different opportunities to enrich, diversify, deepen your application narrative, if not sort of like reinforce it. So Michael, anything else you want to sort of add here about Yale, maybe how to approach an application like this? Otherwise, we'll head over to Stanford.
No, you're right on the mark in terms of what you just said. And one entertaining thing we'll say before we go to the next one was the dean at Yale is now the dean, who used to be the dean at Yale is now the dean at Stanford. And you'll note the similarities between the questions from Yale and the questions from Stanford.
Oh, that's hilarious. So, I love these little anecdotes you have, these little tidbits. So here's the Stanford application. And what Stanford does is it's not dissimilar. And here they've got short questions and they got short essays. The academics are not like the Yale, but we'll go over here to the short questions. And they've got, what's the most significant challenge that society faces today? 50 words. How did you spend your last 2 summers, right? If there's a historical moment or event that you could have witnessed, what was it? Elaborate an extracurricular activity. And notice there's all these red stars. These are all required, right? I mean, you have to answer these, right? Name one thing you're looking forward to at Stanford. Then you actually get to the essays, which are 250 words or so. Again, Stanford community driven to learn in and outside the classroom, reflecting an idea or experience that makes you excited about learning. Then we have this is one of my favorite ones every year. Write a note to your future roommate, 250 words. And then tell us something that is meaningful to you and why. So Michael, some of these are really specific, some of these are really kind of open-ended. Anything you want to say about Stanford?
Again, like I say, I think be yourself, speak from the heart, add it to continue the theme of what your application is all about, and then you'll be seen in a positive light. Again, don't try to write, what does Stanford want to hear me say? No, that is not the way to approach these questions.
Stanford wants to hear you say not what they want, right? Or, well, what they want is what you honestly, truly want to say. They honestly, truly want that. And to
Yep.
be honest, like, I often find that people are afraid of the mundane, right? And oftentimes the mundane is like thrilling to an outside person. Like what to you is maybe kind of like, everyday or old hat, to us might be the most incredible thing. Like I had a student a couple of years ago who she applied to Stanford, and I forget which of the prompts. It was probably no, it was definitely one of the short questions. She wrote about, what is it? Yeah, I think it was in this one, a job you hold, a response you have to your family. She was basically the person who cooked a certain dish for her family. They all loved this one same dish, and it was a dish from, it was a dish with ancestral roots, and it actually allowed her in 50 words to talk not just about this one particular dish she liked to make, but also, tie it to family heritage. Also, even, start to incorporate some vocabulary from Venezuela, and it was just awesome. So again, what might be boring to you might be like thrilling to all of us. Cool. All right, and then we've got one more sort of category, Michael, to check out, and then we'll get over to the Q&A. And these are what we call like other prompts. And in the other prompts, we're going to be looking at Columbia University, and we'll also be looking at Northeastern. And I'll sort of describe what the details are just through those applications. So over here at Columbia, so we're sort of featuring Columbia here because, Columbia has their, your why Columbia, 200 words or fewer. It also has, basically the academic, they have the community essay right here as well, 200 words. But then they have all of these like 150 word like lists where they ask you to list the titles of the readings from your courses that you enjoyed the most during high school, or like books, essays, poetries, and short stories, or plays that you've read outside you've enjoyed most during high school, or like digital publications, websites, journals, podcast content, and as well as also like, movies, albums, shows, museums, events. And Michael, oftentimes people ask, do they really just want a list? Do they?
That they do. No, I think again, this is not a place to put too much thought into this. It's reflect for a minute and say, what were the favorite books I read this year? And I'm sitting here thinking about with the COVID situation, I've read more books in the last, 6 months than I've read in years, so I could fill out this application right now. But I think it's just, it's a situation where thinking about what's the right response. What's interesting about these questions in light of COVID was I was just thinking about if you get down to like the third or fourth question about what plays, what movies, some things that, that you've been a little more limited this year than you have in the past, and so, that is an opportunity for you to talk. But, is it so wrong in here to say that you binge watched something? No, because that's the time, so don't be afraid to be honest in terms of what you did. And I think in some ways in a question like this, being honest will demonstrate that how you dealt with during the period of the COVID situations. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to kind of add, it's implicit in what Michael's saying, but just to like be like explicit about it, like they're not asking you to explain why. They literally just want a list of things that you like, and that the list itself and the what you list and what you list compared to what somebody else tells them a lot about who you are. So Michael, last school take a look at is Northeastern. Now, if I go over to Northeastern, they've got their questions and whatnot, and they have this additional information area, but this isn't an essay. This is just asking about really just sort of legal history. There's no supplement. So my question to you, Michael, is when there's no supplement, is there really no supplement? Is there something that people should be doing, even if Northeastern doesn't give them the opportunity?
I think it goes back to, we talked about the common application, and in the common application, there's the back page of the common application, which says, is there something you would like to share with us? Is there something you would like to expand upon? And we've encouraged students to think about that. You've got 650 words on that back page that you can use in the common app. So here's an opportunity, for example, to expand upon an activity. In the Northeastern application, even though it doesn't ask that question, I'm not adverse to the idea that if you really have some really, really strong reasons why Northeastern is of interest to you, I wouldn't be adverse to putting that in there. Because let's remember, they're getting thousands and thousands of applications. They're
Mhm.
not sure in terms of level of interest. Demonstrated interest is reduced this year because of the inability to visit some of these schools. So if there's something really cool about, say, the co-op program at Northeastern that you want to talk about, I don't think it's so wrong to think about using that back page where they ask questions about your, pardon my frankness, criminal record, but it's also a place where you can add something in terms of why Northeastern. I'm not saying you have to do it. And I think if it's going to be something generic that doesn't add to your application, I wouldn't do it. But I think if there's something in particular that really wants you to say to Northeastern, I'm really excited about your place. Obviously you can go early decision, and that would say it as well too. But if you're not going early decision, here's an opportunity to perhaps say something about why Northeastern resonates with you.
Right. So just to sort of recap what Michael's advising here is that for schools like Northeastern that don't offer you additional writing space, you can come to the Common App and go to the writing section and then go to the additional information section. The first prompt is the COVID-19 prompt, which we talked about a few weeks ago. But again, there's also this additional information section. And what you can do is write like a why Northeastern here, right? Say like 200, 250 words or less. I wouldn't make it so long. You can put it here. And even though it's on the Common App, once you submit it to Northeastern, you can come in here and you can just like erase it. And then, the other schools won't get that. So that's just a strategy that we're showing you to consider for schools like Northeastern, where we just don't have extra space to write. So heading back over to the slides, we're talking about what to do with Northeastern when there isn't anything, any space for us to write on the actual supplement, but we can do it in the Common App. So, Michael, we've answered a lot of the questions that came in through the registrations. And so I'm going to go now over to the Q&A panel and see what people have asked. We have a question here from Marlene. So are we supposed to show a lot of interest in all the schools? Well, I'll certainly say absolutely. If you go back to some of our previous webinars, Marlene, particularly one on, I think it was April 29th, on how to research schools online, we go pretty deeply into the need to demonstrate interest, particularly at schools that are, quite competitive, because, schools want to accept students who are excited to be there. And one way of doing that is, again, demonstrating interest. Michael, anything to add to that?
I think it's not just the competitive schools, it's your safeties as well too. Because the easiest way to turn a safety into a reach is to not show interest in that school and let that school perceive that. The school's sending you emails and you're not responding to them. You're not showing interest in that school. The school will take the approach that, yes, this student's qualified for us, but I don't think they're going to come, and I don't think they're that interested in us. And all of a sudden, the safety becomes a reach. So again, I think you got to love your safeties and you got to love your reaches.
So there's another question coming in, Michael, from Rosa Sara, who's asking, she wants to just quickly take a look at the Common App strategy that I had suggested. So I'm gonna bump over to that. But another question just came in, which is, how can you show interest in schools? So Michael, if you wouldn't mind talking about how you can show interest in schools, and I'll simply show
Sure.
Rosa Sara how the, let me go back to, yeah, if you wouldn't mind talking about how to show
Okay, so in one of our earlier webinars, we talked about the fact that colleges track, they use a program called Slate, which basically tracks when you've responded to emails, when you've opened emails, when you've been in touch with the school. So there's all kinds of opportunities for you to go. You've watched their virtual tours. You've done all the things that you can show to a college that you've shown interest. So virtual tours, responding to emails, reaching out to people at the schools. The schools are tracking that. That's how you show interest. And obviously, once schools open up, if you can get to go for a visit, of course, that's the obvious one. But right now, that's not the case.
Well, it's interesting too, by the way. So a student of mine was visiting Babson College last week. Babson College actually has a drive-through tour.
Yeah.
You do is you register, right? And then they send you to a website, and then basically you take your phone with you, and then you drive around the school or walk around the school, and then you play, the audio, and there's a lovely student who's telling you all about, the Arthur Blank Center for Entrepreneurship in 2 minutes or less. So,
I've had a lot of students, I've had several students comment how well Babson has done this too. Okay.
really,
They've really taken the time to do this well because they understand the circumstances. Yeah.
got it. So I'm just going to click back over to the Q&A slides, and we have a few more questions that are coming in now, Michael. All right, so this was done. And then, so we just answered this live again. We have no more questions right now, Michael. I have a question for you.
Aren't you going to re-show how to put that into the back page of the Common App again, or did you?
Actually, while you were talking.
Oh, you showed it. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I'll do it again, actually, just to double check. So again, we go to the Common App, right? So here's where my colleges are, right? Here is Northeastern. There's no way to sort of show or to write anything more to advocate for our application there. So we go over here to the Common App, go to the writing section. The personal essay is the big essay for the Common App, and we go down to the bottom, not disciplinary history, but go to the additional information essay, right? And then use the COVID essay, and then right here in the additional information, so I got a little word in there so I can get, oh, that's weird. What happened here? Oh, no, it's yes, I do. It's right here. Do you wish to provide any additional information you wish to share? And this is where you type in your response for why Northeastern or why, any other school doesn't have an actual supplement. Okay. So hopefully that, and then you send that in, and then you remove it when you send your applications into other schools. So hopefully that, that was clear for people. And then we have another question that's going to come in. So, Michael, do we have any tips for applying to the Macaulay Honors Program, or I guess maybe honors programs in general, but the question is specifically for the Macaulay Honors Program?
No, I think particularly the Macaulay's Honors Program. I mean, they really have developed a wonderful program here in New York City for students that want to, go to the CUNY system in terms of what the opportunities are for them. And I don't think, in terms of going to the Macaulay Honors Program is any different than what we've talked about. I mean, it's a situation where you need to make sure the Macaulay Honors Program understands you're serious. There have been kids who have picked the Macaulay Honors Program over Harvard because of the level of faculty that are at certain schools, the opportunities they're going to have, the summer opportunities, the free computers. I mean, it's an amazing program, and particularly for families that are concerned about financial aid, showing the Macaulay Honors Program that you're really, truly excited about them is as important as it is at any other school.
Love it. Well, Michael, thank you for that. We've successfully answered all the questions that have come in. So
we've made it under 3 o'clock for the first time ever. Look at that.
We're getting better at this. So thank you very much for attending on behalf of Michael and myself. And again, for people who are interested, as a webinar attendee, you can save up to 50% on a 2-hour admission strategy session with either one of us or one of our colleagues. You can talk about your school list, your career goals. We can talk about finding your narrative hook. We can talk about the admission strategy for a particular school, give you feedback on your essays, whether it's the Common App essays or school specific supplements, or really anything else you want to ask an admissions person. What you got to do is call the Kate's number, 212-359-4208, and ask to speak with someone about the program, and use the promotion code EDGE50, EDGE50, and that's pretty much it. So, Michael, any final thoughts?
Chris, there's another question up there about seeing past webinars.
Gotcha. So how do we hear about past webinars? So go to catestutoring.com. So it's www.catestutoring.com and go to our events and our webinars page, and you'll see the recordings of all of our webinars. And if you're interested, just email us and we'll add you to the list. So Michael, thank you for pointing that out. Any final thoughts or wisdom before we say goodbye, Michael?
In this ever-changing world, continue to check the websites of the schools that you're interested in, the admissions websites of the schools that you're interested in. You never know what might change at the last minute in terms of all of a sudden we're going to have tours. All of a sudden we're not going to have early decision. Who knows what may happen in the next 2 months? So I urge you to make sure that you're staying on top of it. I hope college counselors are doing that, but I think sometimes you have to take the responsibility for yourself.
So with that, good luck. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new topic. Hope to see you then. Otherwise, enjoy these last few precious weeks of summer. Best, be well, and be healthy. Thanks. And Michael, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.